I am the history kid. I don't have a degree in history, but I love history. And if you love history too, this could be the channel for you. Operation Neptune was the Allied amphibious invasion of the beaches of Normandy, France. On D-Day, more than 150,000 troops assaulted 5 beaches to liberate Europe from German control. But in addition to the 150,000 troops on the beaches, the Allies dropped paratroopers behind the lines to take strategic positions and cut off German reinforcements. To connect the Allied beachheads faster, over 13,000 American paratroopers were dropped during D-Day, and among the first were the 6,900 men of the 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles. And of all the stories of heroism on D-Day, none is more interesting than the story of 2 medics of the 101st Airborne Division, Robert Wright and Kenneth Moore. Their story deserves to be remembered. Bob Wright and Ken Moore were both 19-year-old privates in the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division. Angered by Pearl Harbor, Moore had signed up in high school, and he volunteered for the paratroopers because they got an extra $50 a month. But apparently it never occurred to me that they would make us jump out of airplanes. After training in the United States, they were moved to England in January of 1944. The island was so covered with troops and equipment that the paratroopers joked that the only thing holding up the island was the barrage balloons. Wright and Moore were dropped behind Utah Beach. The C-47 carrying the paratroopers took heavy flak, and many of the paratroopers died in the planes, never even getting a chance to jump. 2 commanders of the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment never made it to the ground. When Moore jumped out of his plane, he was near the back. The plane was only 300 feet off the ground, and much of the drop zone was already taking casualties. Wright and Moore were both senior medics. They jumped that day with first aid kits, but no weapons. Although they were medics, their medical training was limited. Moore had only gotten 2 weeks of medical training. Their training and their job, he said, was to stop the bleeding. They had been dropped in a small town named Saint-Mée-Église. The 101st mission in the area was to cut off the main road to Paris, and thus cut off the Germans' reinforcements to the beach defenses. The town had a population of about 80, and it was dominated by a small stone 12th century church. The paratroopers dug into their positions while Wright and Moore converted the church into an aid station. Immediately, casualties started coming in. To this day, you can still see the bloodstains in the pews of the church. The fighting was brutal. The country and its hedgerows offered plenty of places for snipers and machine guns to hide. The road going in front of the town was critical, and so the village became a centerpiece of the combat. Wright and Moore followed the rules of the Geneva Convention. They treated troops from both sides, as well as civilians. 2 small girls from the village were wounded by mortar fragments, and they treated them both. Sadly, only one survived. They would stabilize the wounded as best they could, and then risk their lives to go out and search for more wounded, their Red Cross armbands offering them some protection from the enemy fire. They used a wheelbarrow to carry the wounded back to the church. In the heaviest fighting, the lightly armed paratroopers were pushed back and had to withdraw from the village. But Wright and Moore refused to leave the wounded and stayed behind. When the Germans discovered them, they saw that they were treating casualties from both sides, and so they let them be. A German officer came in and asked if he could bring more of his wounded. They obliged. They treated men, they said, not uniform. The only rule was that the soldiers had to leave their rifles at the door. The church was often in the crossfire, sometimes from American troops who thought it was occupied by the Germans. All of the windows were shot out. They have since been replaced with stained glass. A mortar shell hit the roof and caused more injuries amongst the wounded inside. It cracked the flagstone floor of the church, and that scar can still be seen in the church today. A piece of the fallen roof hit Moore on the head, and for that he was awarded the Purple Heart. He had treated so many seriously wounded that he said he was embarrassed to take it. The 2 worked for 3 days straight and never slept in that time. And perhaps the most surprising incident of them all, after about 2 days, 2 German soldiers came down from the church steeple and surrendered to them. Apparently they had been in the church the entire time, and no one knew. The Germans were finally pushed back for the last time on June 8th, and in those 3 days, Wright and Moore had saved more than 80 lives. Both were awarded Silver Stars for their actions. There are so many stories of heroism in the invasion of the Normandy beaches. The story of Wright and Moore is very interesting because in the midst of all that shooting, they never picked up a rifle. Ken Moore passed away in 2014. At his request, his ashes were dropped from an airplane, one last jump for a veteran paratrooper. And Bob Wright died in 2013. At his request, his remains were buried in the churchyard, next to the church in Sainte Mère Église, where he saved so many. You can still visit that gravesite today.
Hi, I'm the History Guy, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Kids, which is inspired by my channel, The History Guy. History deserves to be remembered. Be sure to subscribe for more episodes.